This is about Joseph, the ultimate rock man. Joseph, of course, was sold into slavery in Genesis 37. Genesis 38, we see something that took a long time. Judah and, Tamar and the 3 kids and all that stuff. But that was like 20 years or something. But now back to Joseph. Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down thither. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him, and he made him overseer over his house, and all that he had put into his hand. And it came to pass from the time that he had made him overseer in his house, and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. Notice again it says Egyptian, not a Hyksos. Okay? Some people will say the Hyksos were in charge of Egypt. No, and we'll see why. The blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught he had, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored. And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, "Lie with me." Why is that? Possibly because her husband was a eunuch. People in high positions back then sometimes had to be eunuchs, because obviously you couldn't mess with the king's harem, but you weren't tempted to kill the king, take his place, and raise a dynasty after yourself. And dynasties are very important in the Bible, especially the Old Testament. But he refused and said unto his master's wife, "Behold, my master wotteth not what is with me in the house, and he hath committed all that he hath to my hand." Sounds a little bit typological as the Father and the Son here. Okay? There is none greater in this house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Not just sin against the master, sin against God. And it came to pass as she spake to Joseph day by day, that he hearkened not unto her, to lie with her or to be with her. And it came to pass about this time, that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men of the house there within. And she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." And he left his garment in her hand, and fled, and got him out. And it came to pass, when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand, and was fled forth, that she called unto the men of her house, and spake unto them, saying, "See, he hath brought in Hebrew unto us to mock us." So the Hebrews were obviously known. "He came in unto me to lie with me, and I cried with a loud voice. And it came to pass, when he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me, and fled, and got him out. And she laid up his garment by her until his Lord came home. And she spake unto him according to these words, saying, "The Hebrew servant, which thou hast brought unto us," hey, it's your fault, you brought him here, "came in unto me to mock me. And it came to pass, as I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled out. Hell hath no fury like the wrath of a woman scorned, I have heard." And it came to pass, when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spake unto him, saying, "After this manner did thy servant to me," that his wrath was kindled. Did he believe his wife? Probably not. She done it before, she'd do it again. He knew her. That's why Joseph wasn't executed for attempted rape. Probably. And Joseph's master took him and put him in the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, out of sight, out of mind. And he was there in the prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. Today we call him the warden. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison. And whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him, and that which he did, the Lord made it to prosper. Notice again, it says Egyptians a couple of times. 2 chapters later, when Joseph meets Pharaoh, he has to shave. Because the Egyptians, the Semites, the Hyksos were Semites. They wouldn't have been offended by a beard. And Joseph wouldn't have had to use a translator to talk to his brothers, which he could talk to him in their native language if they were Hyksos, because the Hyksos spoke Semitic languages and they probably wouldn't have been need for a translator. This, well, the Hyksos, not the Egyptians. I think the Bible contradicts that teaching. These really were Egyptians.
Who teaches that Hyksos were in charge?
Oh, some of these theologians. Now, there's a few points here. You can't fully appreciate what you haven't been through. Sympathy is understanding. It's up here. Someone else's suffering. Empathy is experiencing someone else's feelings. You ever see The Green Mile, that movie?
Yes.
Okay. There were 2 COs, correctional officers. One was mean, one was good, Tom Hanks.
Yeah.
You can't fully appreciate that until you have worked in a prison. How COs treat the inmates. Military movies. You can't fully appreciate them unless you've been in battle. Football. You can't fully appreciate it till you put on a uniform and played. You can understand it, but you can't completely empathize with it. Forrest Gump, when it came out, there was a reporter and she sounded like she was in her 20s. She didn't like the movie. I thought it was a riot. She said it was Gomer Pyle, the movie. She was too young to remember those days. The 60s, when Forrest Gump supposedly happened, did she even recognize Abby Nathan? I'm sorry, Abby Hoffman. Abby Nathan's Voice of Peace up. Okay. Did she recognize Bobby Seale? I think he was in a guy playing Bobby Seale was in the movie. But certainly Abby Hoffman. In other words, you didn't grow up then, lady. Your voice sounds like you're in your 20s. You can't fully appreciate Forrest Gump unless you had been there. Growing up in the time when we boys had a death threat hanging over us. You might not make it long enough to get married because there's a war in Vietnam and not everyone's coming back alive. Tours to Israel, okay? Well, Vietnam photojournalism, you have just pick up a greatly illustrated, with a lot of photos, book on Vietnam, like the Vietnam Experience, those series and Time Life books. You notice early on, the photographers used black and white film. Later on in the war, they switched to color. Now, color film goes back a long time. There was a guy taking pictures in one of the ghettos in, I think, Poland. And part of his pride was, hey, I use color. Most photographers didn't back then. Color is very hard to deal with. Now, with all these machines these days, it's no big issue. But when you're developing your own film and everything, color's a bear to work with. Okay. It's like that with the Bible. Go and see the land yourself and you see things in color instead of black and white. Those in agriculture who can better understand the agricultural metaphors and parables in the Bible. In the U.S. now, we're down to less than 2% of the population working the land because of mechanized farming. Before World War II, people leaving for the cities to work in defense factories was probably over 50%. So, we read these parables having to do with ancient Near East agriculture, and some of it's going over our heads because we haven't been there. A young man in his father's business, let's say his father's turning the business over to him. He's going to understand the relationship of the father and the son because he is there. Abraham gave Isaac all that he had, and that's twice in the Bible, in Genesis. In other words, he turns things over to Isaac, and Isaac probably didn't quite catch it because Isaac was a wimp. You see that in Genesis 26. After Abraham died, the Philistines filled up the wells. Isaac went out digging wells. His servants dug wells. And when they contest him, he just leave and go somewhere else. Okay? And he probably didn't really take his father's business the way he should have. In those days when you got old, you turn stuff over to your son, your eldest son. Okay? So, if you haven't been there, you can't fully appreciate it. You can understand it. It's harder to empathize with it. Joseph was in prison. He didn't do anything wrong to get him in prison. Yeah, maybe he could have kept his mouth shut instead of telling his brothers about his dreams and everything. But he was in prison through false accusation. And there are plenty of false accusations going around. And when I taught Christian school, a streetwise 8th grade girl told me, when you discipline someone, they go home and lie about it. That's Christian school. False accusations are everywhere. What are the different prisons we can be in, even if we're not behind bars? Husband clears out the bank account and leaves you, lady, with 4 kids and all the bills. Okay? The wife leaves and sues for child support, which the husband must pay even if he sees the kids like once every 2 weekends or something. They had on the news or something a long time ago, courtroom shootings, that's why they have metal detectors now. You think it's the mob boss just got sentenced to life in prison. So one of his loyalists take out a gun and start shooting, the judge and the other lawyer and stuff. No, it's the guy that's lost everything. Betty, that's lost everything in a divorce suit. Betty Broderick, whose husband, she helped put her husband through medical school, and then he became a medical lawyer, where the real money is, through law school. He looks at her and says, "You're getting fat." Divorces her, marries someone that looked just like she did when they first got married, maybe half his age. They had security at the wedding, or he turned it down or something. Anyway, she steals the key from her daughter to the apartment where her ex-husband and his new wife are living and shoots both of them. She still says, I was driven to it. In other words, she's showing no remorse. And her next parole hearing, I think, is in 2036. She'll be 83 years old if she makes it that long. She didn't think she did anything wrong. Okay? The prisons we can be in. Financial problems, that's a prison. Anyone that hasn't been there? Health problems. I worked in a nursing home and Bible school. You want to see people imprisoned in their bodies? Yeah. Some of them, it's all for the bodies, sometimes the mind also. But it's the bodies. Addiction. It can be alcohol, cocaine, heroin. People in Vietnam were given drugs because of serious injuries, and they got addicted to them, and they weren't going down a moral, slide. It was the medications. It's like people took, what is the oxytocin or OxyContin for lower back pain, and they got addicted. And there's still in the news about lawsuits and stuff about that. Okay. Girl who lived, classmate, 7th grade, couple of doors down from me, died unexpectedly of spinal meningitis. The only child of a single mother who my mother said never got over it. Recently, I talked to her best friend on Facebook, personal messaging, I think, who was a good friend of hers, probably her best friend, who said, well, she thinks it's a brother that the father had. So anyway, the mother had the girl and the girl died. There was a boy in my town, high school boy, who was murdered. They haven't solved it yet. This was December 1974. Although rumor is someone knows who did it, and he's died, and they know where the guy was from, and we've been fighting over Facebook on this one. This is a well-known case in a very peaceful time. His sister came on the 40th year anniversary of his death, angry, on Facebook. They haven't solved it. Now, Alaska is a dangerous place because grizzly attacks. I had a roommate that was 40 years old when I went to the University of Alaska Fairbanks. His major was Northern Studies. His minor was Alaska Native Languages. He'd been on 23 expeditions. He said all his buddies from the climbs are either dead or so mangled from climbs they can't climb anymore. He had a homestead and everything. But or he at least had a homestead, and he was my first roommate there. And he said there were 14 grizzly maulings per year, and explained a couple of them to me. They do attack. A guy visited his homestead near Cantwell, which is near where friends of mine had a homestead. And by the way, some of it's just burned up just now. I'm on Facebook with him, and he went to check out his property, left his gun in the car, got mauled by a grizzly, which that's black bear country though, but maybe it was a black, but it's supposedly a grizzly. Now, there's a side of a mountain that you have to go up over in light plains, littered with planes that didn't make it over.
Wow.
And I think the plane I flew for a couple of hours, November 905-277, is one of those. I found out later from my ground school teacher. I was able to do ground school for free because I was a graduate student on a stipend. I only flew 2.2 hours. Man, it's expensive to rent a plane and a certified flight instructor. So it didn't go very far. But these commercial jetliners, when you see them in the news, they hit the water, they float. Light planes sink. They call them sinkers, 4-seaters. They don't float like those commercial jetliners, like in the Potomac River or something. Okay? Now, 1989, I was a counselor at a Bible camp in Soldotna, a Solid Rock Bible camp. And program director was named Ted McKinney. I was back in that. I had also done this in '87. I was up there for a few years, even just for family camp as a one-man family before I even met my wife. But primary camp went like Wednesday through Saturday, or Wednesday through Friday or something. Friday. And usually the camps were 1 week, but these were at second and third graders. That Friday, okay, there's another camp called Camp Tenalian I don't know where it is, it's exactly, Bible camp. A guy who had run out of gas twice and had such a reputation that one 8th grade girl said, my mother is a helicopter pilot. Helicopter pilot instructor. She told me don't fly with him, he wastes gas. Anyway, he tries to make it to Anchorage, probably where the gas is cheaper. Cook Inlet is freezing. I lost a classmate in college there. Apparently the boat tipped over and you lose consciousness in 5 minutes and die in 20, something like that. They found a few bodies, I don't remember how many, floating in life jackets. Anyway, it's also got very strong tides. You think it's a river. And he was 10 miles away from, I guess, Anchorage, or 10 miles to land, and he ran out of gas. So he calls a Mayday. He's got, I think all these details are right, a 33-year-old woman who's going back a day early to surprise her fiance, who's the single father of a camper I had, a girl, okay? And an 11-year-old girl and a 12-year-old girl. So it's 4 people in that plane. It's going down into Cook Inlet. And he says, Mayday. The person who picks up the Mayday is the 12-year-old girl's father on Civil Air Patrol. Pilot keeps his hand on the button so that they can hear, but this guy on Civil Air Patrol cannot talk to his 12-year-old daughter in the final moments of her life. It goes in, they send out helicopters, whatever. They find floating oil, an oil slick. They find medicine, a medicine bottle or something that appear, enough to prove to insurance. Anyway, he couldn't talk to her. 2 days later, I'm sitting in church in front of him and his wife and another daughter and maybe the son, whom I didn't get to know till later. He just lost a 12-year-old daughter. It was hard. The pastor was out of town with his wife, obviously having to get back in a hurry on vacation or something. So they had a guest speaker. Now this is 89. 90, I go for family camp again. I'm working on my master's degree. I'm in Fairbanks, so I fly to Anchorage and then to Kenai, which is the next town over from Soldotna. I get a ride to the camp, and I'm family camp, one-man family once again. And this guy, his wife could sing, and at some point she left. Just, the hall, whatever you want to call it, not sanctuary. I mean, we use it for campers and everything. It was a new building. They could play games in it. But this is family camp with, I think, just the adults there at that time. And I could be wrong about that. But he mentions what happened a year ago. He said it's been a hard year. The person who helped him was a maintenance man on that camp who had also lost a kid, Ron Thompson. That tells me something. Oh, by the way, the pilot had a wife and a 19-year-old son, and the son died years later with his wife and baby in another plane crash. They crashed into Denali. So just a lot of death in that place. But the guy who helped this man had lost a kid. See the empathy. He could help because he'd been there. Okay? So if you got a bereaved parent in your church, I'd say hook them up with someone else who's lost a kid. But that put those parents, I don't know how, affected the brother and the sister, obviously not well, in prison. You're in a different type of prison. You don't have the bars, but you're in prison. Church we went to in Lubbock, Texas, 12-year-old girl that had leukemia, and they knew this was coming. They say, one announcement, 1 week she's in the hospital or something. The next week she's acolyting. They take 2 like preteens or something and have them light the candles, a boy and a girl, and snuff them out at the end. The next week she's gone. Parents that lose a 12-year-old, they had some warning though. They knew she had leukemia. Now, Ted McKinney was program director at Solid Rock Bible Camp the years I was there, 2 years as a counselor, 2 years and alternating years, 2 years just as a family camper. He became executive director when the executive director retired. Now, Ted decides to retire. Okay? He's my age, by the way. My peer. He could talk to me. He would share things with me because all the other counselors were younger. He was an educated guy. He'd go on a furlough or something, going on to John Brown University, got a bachelor's. I think he got a master's along the line. Had 4 kids, had them on 5 continents and all over the country. It's not bad for a guy that's, I don't know where he got the money. He retires. He takes a church, probably a small, he had been pastor of a church, probably a small church, because he's also running Solid Rock. And his wife is the business manager. So, and it's also coaching. He was into a lot of track coaching. He wanted to run in the Olympics, I think, but he hit some health problem, whatever. Soon after he retires, he's diagnosed with stage 4 high-grade glycoblastoma in his corpus callosum, which sits deep in the brain. Soon after retirement, he died at the age of 64, almost 5 years ago to the date. I think it was, this is the 28th, I think it was the 24th he died, 5 years ago. The prison his widow was in, even the wife, as she saw him die, seizures and all. She's a good friend of mine. Ted, by the way, visited me at Texas Tech in Lubbock when I was working on a PhD with his kid. He comes down with his kids, probably because he'd been to John Brown in Arkansas. He also, with his youngest, years later, visited me and my wife in Maryland. I mean, he was the greatest Christian leader I've ever known. Wasn't on an ego trip, just really good guy. What's the prison like for his widow? So many people knew him. I mean, so many people. So you don't have to be behind bars like the guys I work with to be in jail or in prison. Help. A woman after giving birth needs help, right? She suffers battle fatigue. The baby's up every 2 hours. That's why when a woman has a baby and she's full-time mother, don't say she doesn't work.
Yeah, right.
My mother doesn't work. Kid, you weren't up every 2 hours with your mother. In the old days when my mother was having kids, I think they kept them in for about 5 days in the hospital, and that's if nothing went wrong. Then they sent you home. These days, it's almost like outpatient, in and out the next day. And my father would hire a nurse, my 3 little brothers as they were born, to help her. I remember their names, at least 2 of them. It helps. So my best friend growing up, his father had a lot of money. They had a maid. And she got married, I met the guy, so they hired another maid. She ran away. I guess by this time the kids were grown up enough. The father wouldn't hire another one. The mother disagreed. Doesn't it help? My wife, we've had 3. I can help somewhat, but I gotta be at work and stuff, just to have someone else. So look in the Bible. Rebecca gets married, and in Genesis 24:61, her damsels went along. You never hear about them again. Now, her son, Jacob, gets married, first to Leah, and Uncle Laban gives him Zilpah in Genesis 29:24 as a maid. Then a week later, he marries Rachel. So Laban gives him Bilhah, gives her his, in each case it was his handmaid. Obviously Laban had quite a few of them. Bilhah as a handmaid for his daughter in Genesis 29:29. In Genesis 35:8, we read Deborah, Rebecca's nurse, died. Now you don't know, by then Rebecca's up there in years, and I don't even think the Bible doesn't tell you when she died. She might have already died. And by the way, carefully, Jacob was married to Rachel, his mother's Rebecca. They hadn't met again yet. if you look at the journeys. But perhaps Deborah was so well known, they'd taken her in or something like that. Actually, the families really met again later on. Jacob meeting with his, parents and stuff. So, help. Without it, you can feel like you're in prison. Rockman. I don't know how many areas of the country use this term. Here in East Tennessee, a rockman is someone that cleans the pods. That's what they call cell blocks, in prison.
Cleans the what?
Pods.
Oh, okay.
We don't call them cell blocks, we call them pods. I don't know, pods are whales, right? Dolphins. He cleans up. Now in high security segregation, when they're in their own cells, they can't come out, and you feed them through pie flaps. If you can trust someone, you shackle them up and he can get out and clean. In fact, there's a guy who works 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, a serial killer, and he works Center Core Rockman, because we know he's done killing, and he's not going to, he always warns you before he kills you when he does not kill staff. He does a lot there. Everyone kind of respects him, I think. It's like we appreciate the work he does. And, he came into my office once when I was up there as a counselor, and this is high security. He's in there for life. He'll never get out. And he comes in, what are those white dots on the floor? I have a hole puncher, and I didn't always put it over the waste basket. Now I got a hole puncher that saves the little white holes. But he cleaned the offices on Saturday. Another time I go into an office and then into a file room, and he comes back, oh, I just wanted to see who's here. And I'm fearless, because he doesn't kill staff. But he's a rock man. Okay, now, what we have at our prison is in highest security. We got 3 buildings, but it's really one big building per se, that enter into the center core. It's a hub office, Rockman. You got one hub office and 3 buildings with 4 pods apiece, and each building has a center core. Now, center core, this is what Joseph was doing, in a sense. So I'm working 26 building. I'm new as a CEO. And we got this center core Rockman. We call him Bama. I won't tell you his real name, this is going online. And people have nicknames or handles, as they call him. One of mine is Suspenders, or OG, old man, all kinds of stuff. But anyway, he's a center core Rockman. So 26 building, Alpha, Bravo, Delta, and Charlie pods empty into center core. And then 25 and 24, it's the same thing. They all have the center cores. And then there's the hub office for all 3 buildings. That's high security. Tell you what he does. Okay, he's supposed to, how long did you have to spend cleaning up the center core, which isn't much bigger than this right here. Probably about that size. I'm in accompanying the nurse as she goes from cell to cell. They're all locked up, segregated, and I have to open the pie flap, this thing where you can put needles in, and she hands them the meds. So she's done. She walks towards the door, and I walk kind of not away directly from her, kind of diagonal. Afterwards, Bama, who's now in the pod, says, Merken, come over here. The cameras are looking at you. You got to stay with the nurse. I didn't realize in high security you have to, actually I think any of those places, you have to stay with the nurse, not just when she's opening flaps, but until she leaves the pod. Okay? He told me I was doing something wrong. That was very nice of him. See, cameras see everything. Unless you don't have cameras, or some places cameras don't see. He didn't want me to get in trouble. Another time,
He called you to come back over where the nurse was?
Yeah, he said after she left, Merken, the cameras are looking, you get in trouble. Okay, they'll tell you it towards the end of the shift. We saw this in the camera, you did this wrong, you did that wrong. Okay. He tells me, now we have to have stab-proof vests to work in high security. So by the time I got there for second shift, the good stuff's gone. It's all sitting in the big barrel ready to be cleaned. So I have to find out what's left and try to fit things that don't fit. And of course, if it's too small, you can't put them on. So they're too big and they just flop around. And he mentioned something was wrong because it was too big, or, you know, your vest isn't put on right. Okay? Duty belt. We get this duty belt. I call it the Batman utility belt.
That's awesome.
You know, you got all this stuff, handcuffs, mace, a radio. Radio usually sits in your vest if you're wearing one. It's easier to reach that way. But, you know, all kinds of stuff. But if you have stuff in the very back, he said, an inmate could pull on that. He warned me, you're supposed to have the stuff here and not in the back. He saved my neck, in a sense. That was Joseph. We had a pod rock man, okay, who would clean the pod, 26 Delta. Bama was all 26 buildings, Center Corps, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, and Delta. He's Delta. This guy that was, now here's what we got for telephone. These phones that plug in and roll on wheels, push button phones. And it's computerized and everything. They know who's calling. You gotta put in your code. And the inmates would fight over that, because especially around 5 o'clock when their wives and girlfriends would come back from work, that's when they wanted to use the phone. And they argue. And it's weird, we got like almost soundproof cells. You can't talk to an inmate face to face almost unless you get right to the edge, but they can yell at each other through the vents. Hear each other all over the pod, even though you're this far from their face on the other side of a door and they can't hear. It's really interesting. And so they can talk to each other. They'll even stand on the toilet, put their face by as close to the vent as they can and yell. And the telephones, we unplug it if we need to, roll it to the next person, and it gets very contentious. I finally got fed up with the fighting. I went in and I yelled and they could hear me. I'm passing the phone from person to person. I decide from now on. The pod nearly erupted. Even though no one could get to me physically, they have a way of getting to you. They get like Pepsi and Mountain Dew from commissary. They fill it up with body fluids and they'll squirt it at you. They can get you. Everyone knows it. They have ways, especially when you open a pie flap to feed them. So they're threatening me. One guy says, I'm going to start as rock band tomorrow. I'll make the list. I said, okay, everybody, here's what's going on. I have never felt such peace in a pod. Never. That rock man saved my skin. That guy who was starting the next day at Center Corps rock band. Okay? There's a guy in the annex where they don't even lock you up. They can't. Your bathroom somewhere else. These are people who are going to get out. It doesn't make sense to try to escape because then you're in maybe longer, or at least a higher security setting. You sometimes leave the prison to work a job and stuff. There's one guy that's not even a rock man, but he's working in the hub office, and he wasn't there for a few hours once. And I think it was the unit manager going around. They call him Red because of his hair color. It's Red. Everything came to a standstill because the prisoner Red wasn't there. Okay. Yeah, I've seen parts of it. But the thing is, these guys don't just clean floors. They'll save your neck. They know the prisoners and their needs. Even in a high security setting recently, a rock man, now this is in the Triangle, which is not the ultimate in high security, but for some of them, you know, they're still segregated in a couple of the pods. So you let a guy out who's shackled, and he can go from pod to pod and decide who gets the phone. He talks with them. And it's amazing how they save your neck. This was Joseph. It doesn't tell you what he did. You know, rockmen can house serve food or something. You undo the pie flap, you open it, because they can't use keys. They're not allowed to. They stick in the tray. They'll take it out later. But I think they do a lot more. They save your neck. So Joseph, oh, I had a guy also working in the annex hub office where, you know, you're pretty well safe, who told me about DVDs that they had. I can't just bring in any DVD to show a class. See, I switched from CO to counselor. I had to do case management, which I hated. And then the old warden who knew I'd been a teacher and a professor asked me to teach a class. Now, I don't work for education because I'm not licensed to teach in Tennessee. So I'm a program facilitator as a counselor, but it's really teaching. So from then on in, I've been I call it teaching. It's really teaching, but it's officially like program facilitation. But this guy knew of some DVDs in the prison that I could show one of my classes. And they rather watch a DVD than listen to me and do paperwork. So I asked the associate warden of treatment. He said, yeah, anything you want, you know, if it's in the prison. Just don't show them Rambo. That's what he said. Don't show them Rambo. He saved my neck.
Makes sense.
See, he was Joseph. Don't look down. It's easy to look at someone like Joseph. He's in prison, attempted rape, put in there by a guy who probably didn't believe his own wife, which was why Joseph was still alive. Don't look down your noses on others. It's so easy to do that. When I went back to college at age 30, we had got this hierarchy of difficulty, almost a snobbery.
Yeah.
You know, the engineers have it harder than the science majors. But you don't, just like you don't call a Marine a soldier, you don't call a boat a ship, you don't call an electrical engineer a mechanical engineer. There's a certain snobbery that can take over if you're not careful, because you've got hard majors as opposed to business or education. Education's one of the easiest majors. Pick up the book, A Conspiracy of Ignorance by, I forget the name, Gross or something. And he shows you these data on the SATs. People who do poorly on the SATs go to college and they become teachers. So you're learning from people of less average ability than your kids. That's the American educational system. The teachers are less educated. Then if they want to get a master's, they have to take the GRE. They generally do more poorly than most people, and they're going to be the teachers that earn more. They get MEDs, Masters of Education. Then, of course, I know they can go EDS, Educational Specialist, and you're taking night classes after the bachelor's because you're expected to be teaching, and then EDD, Doctor of Education. But it's so easy to look down on things. Pre-meds, the toughest people to work with in college are pre-meds. Anything in their way, and that includes you, they knock out of their way. I could tell you some stories about pre-meds. They're the most difficult people to deal with. They're very aggressive type A's. Now, not all of them, but I was thinking medical school, and my pre-med advisors figured I wasn't aggressive enough. My thought was, if God wants me in, I'm in. I'll do the work. And if God doesn't, I'm not in. So I'm relaxed about it. And you're supposed to go in. I know I'm going to medical school, even though 25% of the applicants were getting in. Actually, those days it was up to 40 because of socialized medicine and AIDS. But they can be, they can look down on us. Rich versus poor, it's easy for the rich to look down on the poor, the educated to look down on the less educated. I grew up in a family and in a culture, Jewish culture. 90% of people were going to college after high school, with a national average of 40%, because most people were Gentiles. Now I think it's 50% of the people go. But I overheard conversations with people and my parents and stuff. Yeah, there was a certain looking down on people who weren't college grads. And I dropped out, and I was the black sheep of the family. It wasn't just because I'd become a Christian, but I dropped out of college. I think that was worse for my father. Then I went back anyway. But you don't look down on Joseph. Don't look down on people in prison. Up to 15% of them in our prison even are innocent. DAs lie. Police lie.
Hey,
Police lie.
come on now.
Police lie.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
They do. Not all of them. There's good and bad anywhere you go.
They
though.
lie
Okay.
15% of the time.
Well, 15% of the people we know to be innocent. Okay? The DA's got to win a case. They'll
Yeah.
lie.
They care more about their
Policemen-
win percentage than anything.
Policemen lie. But not all of them. Okay? But don't look down on anyone in any prison, even if they're simply poor. Okay? Or less educated. There's
Jesus.
three lessons. Obviously, Joseph was faithful. The Bible emphasizes that. But there's three lessons. The obvious one is be like Joseph. Be faithful no matter what your conditions, no matter what your prison. Remember, his brothers were mad on him. He ratted on 4 of them.
Wow.
The sons of the 2 handmaids.
Yeah.
He brought the father the evil report. And then he talks about his dreams, which was that's a classic example of Romans 8:28. All things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. But no matter what mistakes Joseph might have made in his early teenage years, he was faithful, certainly in prison. So no matter what, people lose a wife, and they'll tell you they're mad at God. You lose a child, you'll never be the same again. Now, an old person losing a child is one thing. But you lose a kid, a preteen, an 11-year-old, a 12-year-old, a 7th grader,
Yeah.
another 12-year-old. That's hard. You can't. Now, a less obvious lesson, you can't fully appreciate, sympathize, or empathize with certain passages without first experiencing them. I could not have fully understood Joseph had I not been a CO. Not the warden, that's my next job. But the CO is kind of like the warden of the prison. He's got people doing stuff for him. Joseph, I'm sure, saved the warden's neck with all the work the warden had to do. And certainly there have been times when rock men have come to my rescue, even if it's just advice. Don't look down on others, be thankful. Be like Potiphar. He appreciated Joseph's work and just said, here, you do it, I'm going to trust you. Here, you're the one who knows what's going on. Now later he put him in prison, but that was a different story. Be like the keeper of the prison, the warden. Put everything in Joseph's hands. Trusted Joseph because Joseph was so faithful. Jesus healed 10 lepers in Luke 17:1-19, but only one thanked him. So be thankful to people. And of course, Jesus was God. Be thankful to God. Thank people. Psalm 142:7, bring my soul out of prison, that I may praise thy name. The righteous shall compass me about, for thou shalt deal bountifully with me. It's hard in prison sometimes to praise God. Again, your spouse leaves and goes off with maybe someone else, and you're cleaned out of your your money and maybe your rights for your kids and everything, okay? It's a prison, and it's hard to thank God. Be really thankful at times like that, and that can go on for years. But be thankful the best you can. Any questions? Then we've ended. Father, give us all the, yes, go ahead.
I had a comment.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, what are the Hyksos people? I didn't know.
Hyksos are things you read when you read these theology books, usually written by people who don't really believe the Bible. These liberal theologians sometimes, well, they are Hyksos. We don't know Egyptian history. It's fragmented. There was an expert in it that spoke at Tennessee Temple University when I was a professor there. And it's fragmented history. They're still trying to put together things. And some people will say, they're the ones who would tell you the Hebrews, the children of Israel didn't come out of Egypt. It was really just a local tribe that took over, on and on. These same people talk about the Hyksos. People that are kind of liberal, that don't really believe the Bible, they seem to be the ones that bring up the Hyksos things. Maybe others do. But there's enough in there. Joseph had a shave. Joseph had a fake not speaking his brother's language. That would not be, supposedly not true of the Hyksos, because they spoke Semitic languages and they were not offended by beards. Semites were bearded people. Remember David's men? They got captured, they shaved them, or shaved half their beards, I forget how it worked, and cut off their clothes below the buttocks, where you can easily get a new set of clothes. David said, stay here for a while until your beards be grown back. Now the Sphinx had a beard, but it's also the face of the lion, so. But that was sort of a side issue.
Cool.
When you really get into theology, you see some people that write a lot about it don't always believe what's in the Bible. Yes?
My experience with the Hyksos is from a history point of view,
Yeah.
and I'm an amateur reader, and for many years when I was younger, I always dreamed of doing Egyptology, and I would read everything I could. The history is fragmented, but the Hyksos, with what little information there is, the belief is they overran Egypt for a time and took over.
Yeah.
And anytime I've ever heard preachers preach on that Pharaoh being Hyksos, I think the reason, well, I've heard a few sermons on that, and the logic has always been because the Pharaoh and Joseph were able to connect, but he could have been Egyptian. He was Egyptian, and I mean, God could have given Pharaoh favor to see something in Joseph without him having to be Hyksos. I think that is part of it, without knowing. I didn't go to Bible college or seminary, but I've always heard it preached like that they were like trying to explain why the Pharaoh would take such an interest in Joseph, and maybe it was because he was Hyksos, he was Semitic. But
Well,
that's weak. That's a weak argument.
Yeah.
People are
Joseph
too selfish to care about that. They want good workers.
Yeah, I agree with you. Especially
Joseph-
Pharaoh.
Yeah, Joseph had just explained the dreams, and he'd been in Egypt for 13 years,
Yeah.
okay? You can learn a language pretty well in 13 years when that's all people are speaking around.
Right.
If
Especially when you're smart and Jewish.
which isn't, the Hyksos bit, if I'm wrong about it, I'm just saying that's what these,
Yeah.
these
Well,
clues
the
are.
history, I mean, and this is secular history too,
Yeah.
and that's fragmented too, so that, it's definitely fragmented, any way you look at it.
Do they still teach kids Columbus discovered America? Do you realize that's a myth
Yes, it is.
that was popularized by Irving Washington?
Mm-hmm.
Okay? It's, there's a lot. George Washington, our first president, no, he wasn't. He was the first president under our present Constitution.
Yeah.
We had a bunch of presidents before him, but we did not have a separate executive branch. It was like president of Congress, sort of a powerless figurehead position.
Right.
But you know, the cherry tree story, they
Yeah.
made that up.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff that, you know, when I do that, and you've heard this one, at least probably most of you, you know, the case for Jewish history or something. When I do my Jewish background of the Bible, my first one, I brought in more of that. I've redone that series to where there's 9 on the case for Jewish history and not, 9 on the Jewish background of the Bible. And the first one is the case for Jewish studies, that's it. But then 9 more on history, which I have to fill in more now, it's still happening. The Hamas attack and all that. And I gotta understand the Abraham Accords better and the Scud missile attacks before I could ever do that particular PowerPoint again.
I have
Yes.
a couple more questions.
Sure.
I thought it was interesting that you said that you said it's possible Potiphar was not a eunuch, because we know that Joseph was not a eunuch, which is really odd. He went on and had children. So it's kind of odd that he wasn't.
Well,
after
no.
brought in there as a slave.
It might have been Potiphar held a high position. And maybe he wasn't a eunuch. Okay, we don't know. But the thing is, his wife probably wasn't getting it from her husband, and often the husband was like a generation older than the wife anyway. But Joseph was a handsome guy. And Potiphar might have held a high enough position where you had to be a eunuch, but he didn't necessarily do that to his slaves. Yeah, Joseph was not. So this is just a possibility. Why was she like that?
Makes sense.
But then again, there's okay, adult Sunday school teacher in a church we went to in Texas, Lubbock, Texas. He had been a police officer, and he talked about this lady when her husband would go out of town, and you see that in Proverbs. The wife would look for something, and she'd go to the supermarket, you know, scantily clothed. The stock boys would want to work her aisle and stuff like that. And she calls one night to the police, there's someone in the bushes. So this guy's smart enough, he's a Christian. He goes home, picks up his wife in the police cruiser, goes to her house and has his wife knock on the door.
Mm-hmm.
Robbie checked, there's no one in the bushes. Okay? There are some women when the husband leaves town, and they explain that in Proverbs. You know, there's a lot about the strange woman, especially at the first half of Proverbs. But one is my husband, the good man's gone out of town, he'll be back at a certain time. It's right out of Proverbs. He didn't castrate Joseph.
That's not a majority of women.
No, I know
If
it's
you
not
watch
the
internet,
majority.
you can find out the cheating stories, and you start believing that all women are like that. That's
No,
bizarre
I didn't say
for
it
somebody
can
to
happen.
have.
Well, Potiphar's wife was like that, sort of. He didn't have to leave.
Obviously she was.
She was, and but it's just possible Potiphar was a eunuch, but that's implied because of his position. He might not have wanted to do the same to his slaves, but I don't know. And this is, I just probably got that eunuch there from J. Vernon McGee, my teacher and yours, Dr. J. Vernon McGee, who says, too many women in the military, too many women playing sports. He might have said girls. Too many women in seminary.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. He mentioned the military, waves and whacks, but you got to realize this guy was born, I think, around 1900. I actually looked it up once.
1905, I think.
Yeah, and he died in
1988.
88. Was it that late?
It's her favorite person.
Was it that late?
He died from a stroke or a heart attack in 1988.
But he's got that really old-fashioned, view of women. It's like, I'm not even saying it's a bad one. See, women in the military, you can condemn it, but look at Israel. They draft all their ladies at 18.
Mm-hmm.
And reserve duty every year, at least when I was there, until 26 or married, whichever comes first. Now,
don't
guys do
remember.
reserve duty till like 55 or something.
I don't remember
every
when we were
year.
in the military, but I don't think they should ever be in direct combat. That's just
Is
wrong.
Israel got away from that after one of the wars. It was a 48 or 67.
That's just
A
wrong.
bunch of them were raped and killed.
That's just
So,
wrong.
but
Should
now
not be
they're
in
in
combat.
active combat again.
And
The
I'm-
actress who played Wonder Woman in all the Wonder Woman movies, Gal Gadot, she's from Israel and she served in the IDF.
Y'all got to. They're even removing the religious exemption, which was made. In 1948, you had like 400 religious men in the country. So okay, they don't have to go to. They don't have to serve. They're going to have to travel on Shabbat, Saturday. They're going to get food that's not kosher. But now when 25% of the population is religious, you're talking millions now. And so I think a few months, like a year ago or something, they started getting them away from that. They're maybe serving in religious units, but they don't
they've got
necessarily
them
get out of
organized
the draft.
They've got them organized together.
But yeah. So, and is that, I don't even know if that's still on. It is. Any other comments? Yeah, I don't know if Potiphar were a eunuch. I think McGee brought that up. I used to love to listen to him when I could.
Why?
He had,
Here's my question though: if he
What?
was a eunuch, why would they have him marry somebody? That's almost cruel. That's almost
he got
pushing
the
cruelty.
job. He got the job after he got married.
Okay. Wow.
Now, I'm not
That's
even saying he
harsh.
was.
Right.
Okay.
That's harsh.
There are certain positions you have to make certain sacrifices for, and you get them after you're married.
Yeah.
And that would have been one of them. But who knows?
It's interesting.
And I'm not, there's just that possibility. But
Right.
obviously, what she says is she wasn't faithful to her husband. The implication, one guy who taught on this, Stanley Toussaint, who's now gone, I heard him speak on this. He said the penalty for attempted rape in Egypt was death.
Yeah.
I would not state that explicitly without another source, because Christians, we tend to repeat what we hear,
Right.
and it's sometimes not true.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll say Stanley Toussaint taught us that. Okay. Solid Rock Bible Camp family. No, wasn't. Yeah. Oh no, he was. I heard him in 1989 do a series on the parables and stuff. When he taught on that was when I was now married back in Alaska with my wife, 1997,
Mm-hmm.
and we were both working at Solid Rock. Ted said, counseling isn't conducive to married life, or married life isn't conducive to counseling, one or the other. You can't be a counselor. So my wife and I ran the snack shop. I also did maintenance requests in the sense of, look, this needed to be done. I told somebody. So it was mainly snack shop. And Stanley, we went to a church one night, and this lady standing outside, I think her name was Maxine Toussaint. And I said, you were in any relation to Stan Toussaint? Yeah, that's my husband. He was speaking at church that night. We had no idea. I hadn't seen him in 8 years. And he spoke night after night in that church. And he must have done a really good job, because after he spoke the last time, the pastor announced his resignation, probably feeling, I'm not up to this guy. He was not a bombastic preacher that would make you feel bad. He was an old guy, had taught Greek at Dallas Theological Seminary, probably retired by that time, but he just did a really, really good job teaching. He taught, I think, on a few nights on Genesis, a lot about Joseph or something. But that was the night that he said that, it was the penalty for attempted rape was death. So Potiphar could not have believed his wife. But J. Vernon McGee, might have been McGee, might have been Toussaint. Yeah, it was probably Toussaint, come to think of it. you know, you knew she'd done it before, she'd do it again. Yeah, I think that was Stanley Tucci. But anyway, I've heard a lot from McGee's view on women. I
It's not
won't
the
say I
best.
agree with it.
Right.
Well, military's one thing, sports are another.
I don't
Now
agree
it's
with
the
the military
trans
thing
bit.
either.
Yeah. If girls want to play sports, women want to play sports, that's fine with me. And they want to go to seminary, it's fine with me. The military's a different thing. And but anyway. Anything else? Should I turn this off myself? I know how.
I'll do it.
Father, we do pray for good, safe, productive weeks, even as I set up to take 2 final exams. In Jesus' name, amen.